Thank you all for joining. We're going to get started at 8 o'clock. I remember at our board retreat a couple of weeks ago, before Marianne and Sam left for Rome, they were worried that they hadn't gotten their credentials yet to meet the Pope and to be, active in the Synod, and to see those pictures of Marianne with the Pope and Sam, man, I still get goosebumps. So I'm going to keep my remarks brief. Millie really wanted to be here tonight, but she's taking care of a sick friend. So she's really doing the godlike work that she always does. And we're going to carry on without her. It is being recorded. And we're going to ask you guys if you can put your questions in the chat during the presentations. We're not going to take active questions whilst Marianne and Sam are presenting, so we can get through the agenda, but we will have time at the end of the meeting to do that. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the proceedings over to Marianne for a brief introduction.
Great. And thank you so much for stepping in to host, Daniel. We said it's your first kind of official public act as vice president, so congratulations on that. We're glad to have you doing this. And welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining this. We're really happy to have a chance to report out on the work that we were able to do in Rome. And just to set the context, want to remind everybody that since the Synod process began, Dignity USA and all of you have been so involved in this work. We started with a series of listening sessions so that our members and friends could have a safe place to voice their concerns, feelings, hopes, and dreams. For the Synod, we developed a guide for folks who wanted to participate in parish and diocesan-sponsored listening sessions and to raise issues of concern to LGBTQIA+ people and our family members. We sent the reports of our listening sessions off to the Vatican Synod office that Cardinal Grech runs, as well as to the USCCB, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops Synod program, so that they were filed in both official places. When the Instrumentum Laboris came out, Dignity USA had a response to that as well. And then we talked through what kind of representation we wanted to have as the assembly was meeting in Rome. The board approved for both Sam and me to go. Sam Albano, our national secretary, has been the head of all of our Synod work and coordinated all of that, so he was a great representative to be there. And he can also talk about how he used his book, God's Works Revealed, as a great entry point into some of the work that we did there. So with that very brief background, I will turn it back to Daniel and Sam.
Okay, thank you, Marianne. So our next presentation will be by Sam on the international and intersectional work done in Rome.
Hi, good evening. For those who don't know me, my name is Sam Albano, and I am the National Secretary of Dignity USA. I live just outside of Indianapolis, Indiana. It's good to be here with you this evening. And for my part this evening, I'd like to talk a little bit about the intersectional and international work that we had the opportunity to do when we were in Rome. There were many groups from around the world, groups focused on church reform, groups focused on working for equality in the church, who had representatives there in Rome during that time. We were able to connect with many of them. The first evening that we were in Rome, we participated in a liturgy of lament with the Association of Roman Catholic Women Priests and some of the other groups working for women's equality. And it was really a very moving prayer as we lamented the ways that women have felt excluded within the church and in the ways that women have been excluded from ministry. This, for us, was a very important point that came up in our Synod conversations that we had, the need to have gender equality in our church, the need to have the voices of women represented. And so we thought it was very important to be a part of that intersectional work. The next evening that we were in Rome, we participated in a prayer witness with We Are Church International. And you can see some of the pictures down there of that witness, all of us in our yellow shirts in St. Peter's Square. The plan was for us to put on these yellow shirts proclaiming equality for women, for laity, for LGBTQ plus people, for married people, for everyone in our church. And we marched down to the square one evening and we sang a song about equality there. There were, I would say, probably about 30 to 40 of us who were there. We weren't really sure what was going to happen. This is something that is really forbidden in St. Peter's Square, but we did get all the way through our song and we were able to take some pictures, and I noticed some of our folks had conversations with people. We certainly got a lot of attention there, and let's just say we made it out of the square and back into Italy before there was really much police response there. They were slow, I suppose, in their response. Also, while we were there, we participated in the Spirit Unbounded conference. This is a conference of various reform-minded Catholics in mostly the English-speaking world and German-speaking world. And it gave us a chance to meet a lot of new folks and form some positive relationships. Marianne participated in a panel there, and she can share a little more about that if she wants to. Some of the leaders in the LGBTQ plus Catholic movement were a part of that panel, and they had a chance to talk about some of our concerns and some of the important themes of our work there. Finally, we met together with the European, Marianne may have to chime in and say the name of this, the Roman Catholic Working Group of the European Forum of LGBTQ plus groups, something similar to that. And many of those groups are also members of the Global Network of Rainbow Catholics. And we spent a day meeting and strategizing with that group and hearing about the situation of LGBTQ plus Catholics in each of the countries that was represented. I believe there were 7 or 8 or maybe 9 countries in North America and Europe. We were very cognizant that members from the Global South were not represented there. And in particular, one of our concerns going forward is for our siblings in Africa, our siblings in the Middle East, and those who are facing really violent persecution in different parts of the world. That was, at one point I turned to Marianne and I said, I think this is the one thing that we really left out of our Synod report, that this is really a huge issue in certain parts of our world. And so I think that's going to be something that we're thinking about going forward. How do we advocate and appropriately lift up the voices of LGBTQ people in other parts of the world? Marianne, did you have something you'd like to add to that?
I noticed there are representatives here from Dignity Canada Dignité. So I just wanted to note that back on the last slide where we had the panel on LGBTIQ issues down on the bottom here, that Mark Rivera from Dignity Canada was a representative on that. And one of the other really interesting participants was this young person here, Mara, who is a non-binary young person who was chosen to participate in the German Synodal Way. He was an official delegate, or they were an official delegate to that program, and has a really wonderful experience. We're working with our young adult caucus at this point to get a connection going between them and Mara to talk about what it was like to be part of that work. From the perspective, they were chosen as one of 15 youth delegates to that. So that was really cool. Okay, Darby, if you can move a couple slides back. So, yep, back to the doors. Be good. So this is something new that we are breaking out tonight. as we were walking to the equality rally in St. Peter's Square, Sam looked over to the left and said, "Oh my gosh, that's the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith doors," which is now called the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. So after the equality rally, on the way back, Sam and I stopped at the doors, and many folks on this Zoom will remember that back in 1992, after what was then the CDF issued a document ordering bishops worldwide to work against LGBT civil rights laws, then President Kevin Calligari, who happened to be in Italy on vacation, along with his partner Tom and friend Janet, they took a train to Rome, held an international press conference at the door of the CDF. He put this document from the CDF in a big manila envelope, scrawled across it, "Rejected, returned to sender." And he also put a copy of the New Testament in there because he said it hadn't been read, obviously, by the people in the office, and tacked that to the doors of the CDF. So since we were there, we thought it was only fitting that we hold a small witness as well in front of the CDF doors, and then as kind of a greeting to the new head of the dicastery, we left a pride flag on the door for them. We have no idea how long the pride flag stayed after we left, but it was just sort of our little act of commemoration of what Kevin had done for us so many years ago, and a witness to the fact that we had been there.
That's not our sign. It says something in Italian.
Yeah, it says, "Don't park in front of the doors or you'll be towed away." Not very profound.
Oh, is that what it says? Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so our next section is also going to be run by Sam on encounters with Synod delegates.
Thanks, Daniel. So back in August, I made a decision that I was going to reach out to 11 out of the 18 delegates from the United States who would be participating in the Synod. I sort of went through the list and found those who, I don't know, that we might have a prayer with, and decided to reach out to them by letter. And I also mailed them a copy of my book, God's Works Revealed. So about, I don't know, maybe 3 weeks after that, I received an email from Bishop Kevin Rhodes, who was one of the delegates and is the bishop of Fort Wayne, South Bend in Indiana, the neighboring diocese to mine. And he told me that he was on page 162, I think that was the page, and he'd been reading it, and he would be happy to sit down and have lunch with Marianne and me when we were in Rome. Also, the other delegate who responded was a priest from the Diocese of El Paso in Texas, and his name is Father Ivan Montelongo, and he and I had the opportunity to have coffee one afternoon during the break. So a little bit about our lunch with Bishop Rhodes. It certainly was positive. We had a really good conversation. Also, he paid, so I will give him credit for that. But it was really just a conversation between three people who are members of the church and who are members of Christ's body. We certainly don't agree on every point, and I think he was very clear about that, but I think he was willing to hear what we had to say. And he talked also about some of the questions and situations that have arisen in his diocese related to LGBTQ plus people, and how he's tried to handle some of those things in a pastoral way. One thing that became really clear in that conversation is that there are a lot of things he doesn't know about LGBTQ people. There are a lot of things that bishops in general don't know. And so it gave us a chance to share some information with him and maybe to correct some misconceptions that he might have had. So I think we had a very positive meeting with Bishop Rhodes. The next day, I had a meeting with Father Montelongo, who also had read my book when I sent it to him, and he responded and had sent me an email after that. And another theme that sort of repeated itself in that conversation, he said, this is really not a topic that I know very much about. I would say he was very receptive in wanting to learn. That was, for me, the most positive encounter with a Synod delegate that I had in Rome. He mentioned working with immigrants and migrants, and there are many of those in his diocese, and he himself was an immigrant to this country at one time. And I think he understands that people, all of these issues of people being on the margins are related and intersect with each other. He felt that there are a lot of issues and there are a lot of people who are hurting in the church, and there are a lot of people to whom the church needs to reach out better. And he shared that he felt very overwhelmed by that. And my response to that is that we are the body of Christ, and each of us has a particular role in the body. And this is why none of us are called to do this work of being church on our own. One thing that touched me personally in my meeting with him, I shared with him that in 2014, I had been removed from the parish council in my parish after being out as a gay man for about a year at that point. And he said to me, well, that's scandalous that happened. And that to hear this from a priest and a canon lawyer and someone who really doesn't know me, that really touched my heart to hear that. Also, we spent a little bit of time, Marianne and I, just kind of standing outside where the delegates walk in and out of the Synod meetings. It's a great place to find people. It's a great place to meet people. And these folks don't tend to have their entourage and their security like they have here in the US. So if you recognize someone, you can walk up to them and maybe have a conversation. So I was able to do that. I ran into Father Jim Martin there, who I already knew. Also had an encounter with Archbishop Anthony Fisher, who is the Archbishop of Sydney in Australia. And there's a picture of that there. And a couple of months ago, when our group of pilgrims was in Lisbon for World Youth Day, they had an encounter with Archbishop Fisher, and he took some time to talk with them, and he remembered them. I had shared that story with him, and he said he remembered them very well, and he remembered their question. And I offered him a copy of my book too, because maybe he should read it, and he's an English speaker, which he accepted it, and he thumbed through it. So maybe he'll learn something. He's one who maybe should learn something. So, but he was very gracious and said he would remember to pray for me. And finally, Marianne had a more extended meeting with Father Jim Martin, and I'm going to let her speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so Jim invited me to come over to the Jesuit Curia one afternoon. As Sam said, the Synod published the schedule, so we knew when the breaks were, when they had an extended lunch break every day, and we knew when they would be going into meetings, out of meetings, and that for the day. And as Sam said, we would just
we were ready for them.
Yeah. So that was great. And there were some encounters that, we can't really publicize that happened that way, but, was just kind of there being a visible presence. So during one of those breaks, Jim had invited me to come over to the Jesuit Curia, and we went up to the rooftop deck, which is just gorgeous and lovely, and talked a lot about what he was experiencing as sort of, the person who was perceived as the main contact on LGBTIQ issues there. And he talked about the experiences from very, very hostile to very supportive, and the reactions when, one of the Synod delegates spoke about her sister committing suicide after a priest had after she had confessed to being bisexual, and the priest called her intrinsically disordered and refused to give absolution. And, just the response of the room of people being incredibly torn up about it and some people having to remove themselves. He also talked about one delegate refusing to sit at a table with him out of fear of being photographed together, and people assuming that meant he approved of things. And the tenor of some of the conversation that he characterized as violent, which was really disheartening. And it kind of became clear that he really needed some support and outlets during that. So we were kind of in touch at least every other day after that to just kind of let him talk through what was going on and what he needed. And I hope that was helpful to him and helped sustain the work that was going on. So I think he was in a very challenging position and appreciated having some folks that he could talk with a little bit and who would understand where he was coming from on that. He also told me the day I met him was the day that Janine Gramick and the New Way staff were meeting the Pope, and he let me know that was happening, so I could be prepared for the news to break on that.
Could I share that was the first piece of news that I read when I landed back in the United States, that Janine had met with the Pope. So wonderful.
Okay, our next section is going to go to Marianne on the diplomatic meetings that you guys had.
Oh, all right. Before we do that, just very briefly, just back to the slide, Darby, with other synod-related activities, we just wanted to note that, along with the official meetings, there were these sort of opportunities for public prayer that happened. Sam was able to participate in one of the rosary vigils that happened on a Saturday night. I went to the vigil for migrants and refugees that were happening, and it was just really good to see folks not only doing the business there, but participating in these prayer activities. So just to give a flavor of some of the other things that were happening. As we were preparing for this meeting, Jeff Stone, who had been part of a group that went to the global network of Rainbow Catholic meetings in Rome in 2015, while he and Leo Egashera were there, they had the opportunity to go to our embassy at the Holy See and do some training for the staff there on LGBTQI issues and Catholicism. So he suggested, why didn't we reach out and see if we could do a meeting with them? And they were very gracious. And Sam and I met with two officials in that middle picture, both political staff there, and talked about the work that they do in conjunction with the Holy See, and how LGBTIQ issues come under vulnerable persons, which is one of the three major points in their relationship with the Vatican. So we talked about both our global issues as well as how Vatican teachings trickle down into U.S. politics and policies. And they were just wonderful diplomats, very knowledgeable. And they told us that the next week, the State Department's special envoy for LGBTIQ human rights, was going to be in town and invited us to meet there. Unfortunately, Sam had already left by the time she arrived. So down in the lower left, you'll see a picture of me with Jessica Stern and also Kate McElwee from Women's Ordination Conference, because Jessica was also very interested in the role of women in the Catholic Church and how gender and sexuality issues play out. So we had a great opportunity to meet with Jessica to hear about the work that they have been doing. She uses both pronouns, have been doing with the Vatican over the last year, and places where they were seeing some opportunities for overlap. So that was great. Through an introduction made by Miguel Diaz, I also had the opportunity to meet with Emilce Cuda, Dr. Emilce Cuda, who is has been called the Pope Whisperer. Emilce is from Argentina, has worked alongside of Pope Francis for many, many years, and is seen widely across Rome as having the most insight into who he is as a person and what it is that he is saying when he speaks publicly. She was absolutely lovely, wonderful to talk with, and, just really shared a lot of information about the Pope's priorities, about the differences in how Latin Americans view church versus people in Europe and North America, perhaps. I think it was just a really wonderful contact. And it was just a real privilege to meet with a woman who heads, she is the secretary for the Pontifical Commission on Latin America. So one of the few women in a senior executive office in the Vatican. Um, and just a contact that I hope we'll be able to continue working with over the years.
Wonderful. Okay, the meeting with the Pope. Marianne, this is you.
Yeah, so we went over knowing that it was likely that that there was a meeting with Pope Francis scheduled for October 25th, although I will say we went over with no official confirmation that there was happening and never got an official confirmation. In fact, the night before the meeting, everything that I had been told about what was going to happen changed. I had originally been told to go to a certain building at 8:30 in the morning, along with our colleagues from other colleagues from GNRC. The day before, it was changed to get in the line for the general audience at 7 in the morning, and you'll take it from there. But we had done some preparation. In the top left corner, you'll see the little packet of gifts that Dignity USA had prepared. We took our Synod report and had it translated into Spanish with the assistance of Lourdes Rodriguez Nogues, who checked the sort of Google Doc translation, brought a copy of Sam's book over, and then a Todos, Todos, Todos t-shirt. The Global Network of Rainbow Catholics also had our Synod report, and then we had framed images from the 3 global gatherings that we had so he could see what our community looks like. This yellow card, everybody who was going to the general audience had a blue cardstock certificate saying they were going. We had nothing. And once we got through security, we were told we had to meet this nun that none of us had ever met before. And when we got there, she handed us these yellow papers that were our tickets that were there. So that's how we got into this. You can see the pictures of the 4 of us from GNRC, myself, Ruby Almeida, Alessandro Praviti, and Chris Vela, who were the GNRC delegates. And it rained that morning as we were waiting in line to get into St. Peter's Square. And then this gorgeous rainbow just arced across there. So we, of course, took that as a sign of good things. And Darby, if you can move forward. And then once we got through the security and had met Sister Genevieve, whom you can see down in the lower right picture in the very right-hand corner, who was our host, we were seated in the second row up on the dais for the general audience, maybe 50 feet from where the Pope was speaking. And after the conclusion of the audience, he came over and talked to us. He was wheeled over. He was in the wheelchair the entire day that day, with a big circle of security around us, but he came and he spoke with us for several minutes. We were able to present our gifts to him. I apologized for not having the Todos, Todos, Todos t-shirt ordered for him in white, which he laughed at. And then we just had this wonderful conversation about both thanking him for his words on decriminalization and how important that was, and the colleagues that we have who have had to flee their countries, who have suffered violence, who've been evicted from their homes, who don't have jobs anymore. and asked, can we continue, can this work continue to make sure that the entire church, other bishops and Catholic politicians are following that work? And then we also talked about the need for a more inclusive church and thanked him for the work that he had done to send signals that was what needed to happen. I just love at the end of the conversation, Ruby asked if she could hug the Pope, and he said yes. So that's the picture of the embrace. He was just very warm. And then at the end of the conversation, he said to us, Andante avanti, which means move forward, keep going, press forward. We've heard various translations of that, which again just felt incredibly hopeful to be there.
Oh, wow. Those pictures are so great. So actually on the count of moving forward, I know the final report has come out, at least in this first part of the synod. Do either of you want to give just a brief overview of that?
You want to start, Sam, or?
Sure. The final report did come out last Saturday, and as far as I know, it's still only in Italian. We've gotten translations of some parts of it. And the report does say on the topics of sexual orientation and gender identity that the delegates feel a sense of, I don't know what the words were, compassion and care, and that there need to continue to be conversations on this topic. It also, in a positive sense, it suggests that we need to begin consulting the sciences and social sciences on these topics, which we've been saying for a very long time. Unfortunately, the most disappointing part of it was that it does not use the terminology LGBTQ plus or any combination of those letters. And that is significant because in 5 of the 7 continental reports going into the synod, we were mentioned by that term. And the Vatican's own Instrumentum Laboris, the document preparing for the synod, mentions LGBTQ plus people. And so this is a significant deletion, or as Marianne, I think, very poignantly called it, an erasure of us from the document. One of the things that we do know from reports that we're hearing is that acronym originally did appear in the draft of the final document that was supposed to be issued last Saturday. It was not able to garner a 2/3 majority vote in order to pass. And so that had to be removed. I think that is consistent with some of what we're hearing about the conversations that happened on the synod floor. Marianne, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
The other thing that is important to acknowledge about the final report is that it says that the synod delegates are supposed to engage with the rest of the church in the 12 months leading up to next October's second assembly, but it doesn't say how, and the mechanisms are being left to bishops' conferences. So I think it really behooves us to figure out ways in which we want to continue to be heard and to follow the process very carefully over the next month. We definitely heard that the authors of the draft, as they started circulating the draft of this final document, got so much pushback around using LGBT or LGBTIQ or LGBTQ that they knew that any paragraph with that language in it would not get the required 2/3 vote to finalize it, which is why that terminology isn't there. So we do have a formal statement on that, which is on our website. So if folks are curious, you can read it, and it'll be linked to in tomorrow's Dateline. But I think it's really sobering that's how things wound up with this. I said in the statement, the very first speech with which Pope Francis kicked off the assembly for the delegates told them to be bold. And, to not even be able to call us by name feels like a real failure in that. So it's definitely a mixed bag. And I would encourage folks to read the report to see what it says.
And I would add to that, we always knew that this process was going to be a mixed bag. This was something that I talked to the board about 2 years ago when we started this process, and something that I shared in our listening sessions when we had those at the beginning of 2022, that we have to manage our expectations here. We have been doing our work in this organization for 54 years, and our work continues, and our work, I think, has a long future. So I think the fact that these topics were raised as much as they were in the Synod Hall really attests to the work that we have done and the work done by those who have come before us, those we remember on this All Saints and All Souls Day today. And I think it speaks to our future, that this is work that will have to continue going forward. I think, in being realistic, we know that there is 11 months between now and the next synod, and so these are conversations which can continue. I don't expect that we're going to have some sort of final answer a year from now, and I don't think any of us do. So I think it's important, not necessarily to be optimistic, but to remain, to have a sense of hope about what we're doing, but also to recognize this is a long game. It has been and will continue to be.
Awesome. Well, thanks, you guys. We have about 20 minutes left of the hour to take your questions. Darby, do you want to go over the questions that were put in the chat?
Oh, I think we had a little bit more to add, Daniel.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
We wanted to talk just a little bit about the work that we're going to be doing over the next year. And that's something that's still coming together with the board, especially since the Synod just concluded on Saturday. We're going to continue to follow what's happening with the Synod in Rome and what's happening here in the United States related to the Synod. And we hope to continue to capitalize on some of those relationships that we built with delegates, especially if they're going to be there again next year. And one of the things that we're going to really continue to push for is representation of LGBTQ people in the Synod process, locally here in the United States and also in the Synod Hall itself in Rome. And I think that's significant, that they're having conversations about us, but we're still not in the room. I know, I think for some of the folks involved, Father Jim Martin was sort of seen as the LGBTQ guy, but that's different than having voices of real openly LGBTQ people represented in the Synod Hall. And so that's something that we're going to continue to push for through the relationships that we have. And finally, we think it's important to consider having Dignity USA have a presence again next year in Rome when the Synod of Bishops meets again next October. And we really thank you and appreciate your support in helping us to be there and be present there. And we hope that you'll continue thinking of ways that you can support Dignity USA and perhaps help us have a presence in Rome again next year.
Awesome. Okay, so questions. I know people have been putting comments in the chat.
Yes. So the first question that we got was from Alan, and it says, what do you think the bishops need to learn the most about LGBTQIA plus people?
Oh, I can maybe start. It was very interesting. After Bishop Rhodes from Fort Wayne had responded and sent me an email and said he would meet with us, I went on his diocesan website and I found a document that he had written about LGBTQ people. I don't think he used that term back in 2013, so about 10 years ago. And I was just trying to gather some information on this person that we would be meeting. And as I was reading through his document, he mentioned different sorts of categories of LGBTQ people. There are some that, and forgive me if I don't get this totally right, but there are some that are celibate and chaste and remain in the church. And then there are some that leave the church and are angry and hate the church. And I'm reading through sort of these different characterizations of people. And I'm saying to myself, well, I don't think I actually fit into any of these categories of people that he's talking about. And so I hope that we made a little bit of a difference there, because I don't fit into those categories. I don't think Marianne fits into any of those categories. So I hope that by reading my book and that by sitting down and having lunch with us, that maybe he's got a new category of LGBTQ people, even if perhaps he doesn't have it totally fleshed out. So I think what I want people to know, and this was so powerful in our Synod report, that we're people who pray, we're people who recognize and appreciate the gift of our baptism and the gift of the Holy Spirit in our lives. We're people who know how to discern and listen to the call of the Holy Spirit. And as an organization and as individuals, this is something that we have been doing for a long, long time. In fact, many of the ways that we operate are, in fact, synodal. So I think that I would want the bishops and the delegates to recognize that we are striving to live our call to holiness as persons and as people. And I think that was a really powerful theme for me that came through in the synodal conversations we had in 2022, and in the report that we sent to them.
Thanks, Sam. I think the other thing I would add is it was very clear from the reports that there is a huge amount of transphobia in that synod hall and among a lot of the bishops in particular who were delegates. So, even for folks who feel like they may know a lot about lesbian, gay, and bisexual people, the issues of gender and gender identity and how, it's gender is not just male and female and complementarity and all of that. I mean, that's so new for a lot of these folks that they're terrified and very ignorant in the pure sense of the word. They just don't know. They also, Sam shared an article shortly after he was back about, a bishop calling gay and lesbian people as full of witchcraft, stuff like that. So that there are still some really basic prejudices that exist. So I think that supporting our members, particularly in areas of the world where there hasn't been strong, LGBTQ visibility movements, to be able to start telling their stories, if it's safe for them to do that, or to get family members, is really important work to keep doing. And in many parts of the world, people have more access to their bishops than we do here. So they may have opportunities to do that, but there is a lot of ignorance still out there.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we've got a couple more questions now. This one is for Marianne. If you don't mind, what were you thinking when you held the Pope's hands? And this is from Richard. He says, your look conveys such depth and intensity.
Yeah, so that moment occurred very close to the end of our conversation, when we were talking about some of our colleagues in Africa who've been displaced or lost jobs or suffered violence. as a result of the criminalization laws in Uganda and Kenya and some of the other places. But then I also had this flash of just thinking about so many people within our own movement, within Dignity USA, who would have loved to have lived for the day when Dignity USA was sitting at the Pope, who had led through all the periods when we were demonized so horrifically, and are still considered a dissenting organization and banned from churches, and many bishops banning priests from celebrating Eucharist with us, and all of those things that we know have led to us being the community that we are, and just so many of their faces were just kind of flashing in front of me at that moment. And thinking about them.
All right. Thank you so much. So we've got now a very theological question from Mary. In the new motu proprio issued yesterday entitled, I'm going to butcher this, Ad Theologium Promovendum, the Pope seems to be moving in a solid direction. Contextual theology, use of other disciplines in the doing of theology, etc. This seems to me a positive move for LGBTQ plus issues. What do you think? For example, might the morally disordered language in the catechism be erased/replaced?
Mary, you always ask the easy stuff, right? Well, yeah, this whole thing, like even through the meeting with us, I kind of feel like Francis has been trying to send a message that there are many ways to different ends, that the church is not walking a single path. We're on lots of different paths, the synod being one, what he's doing, with meeting with Jim Martin publicly, with meeting with the New Ways staff and Janine publicly, with writing to fortunate families, with meeting with Global Network of Rainbow Catholics. I mean, I think that was a very intentional way of sending signals that, there are multiple things happening in the church. Some of his new appointments are clearly signaling that some new things may be coming. How long will it take to eradicate this really harmful language in the catechism? Gosh, I don't know what the timeline is on it, but I think it is clear to me from the conversations that we had, and this report is a sampling of those conversations and the one that we can talk about publicly. It is clear that there are conversations happening and there is work being done all across the Vatican on some really important issues on gender, on sexuality, on identity, on what does pastoral care really mean. I'm not sure I would have said that a month ago.
Yeah, thank you, Mary, for that question, and thank you, Marianne. One thing that I would add, I believe it was last week, there was an interview with Cardinal Christoph Schönborn, Cardinal Schönborn, in the former Archbishop of Vienna, and sort of out of nowhere, he had made the comment that the Pope can revise the catechism on this particular topic. And so I don't know if that's a sign of things to come or if that's a cardinal just musing on things. But I thought that was a very interesting interview that happened last week. And as far as consulting the sciences, looking at other disciplines, this is something that the theologians have been saying for a long time. This is something that we've been saying for a long time. This is something that I wrote about in my book. And so, yes, we know that theology can be done that way. So we can only hope that way of thinking has a future in the Vatican.
Thank you so much. We have a couple of questions. I think I'm going to roll these two together because they're kind of connected. The first one is from Lori, and Lori's question is, was there a rainbow mass held during the synod that you're aware of? And then Samantha asked, as a trans person that converted to Catholicism long after transitioning and later in life, who has attended Mass for 10 years and been very active in the church, and then having to leave the church, where should Samantha worship? They miss the Mass and especially the Eucharist. So 2 questions about the Mass.
I'm not aware of any rainbow mass being held anywhere in Rome. When the Global Network of Rainbow Catholics and European Forum of LGBTQ Christians, when Catholic Working Group got together, we prayed, but we didn't have a mass. So I'm not aware of any such event that happened. And Samantha, I would encourage you to give us a call or an email at our office, and we can talk with you about options in your area. We would also encourage you there on the Dignity USA website. There's a link to all of our communities, as well as communities that are offering online liturgies. So we're happy to work with you one-on-one to figure out where might be a good place for you to go and be in an affirming Catholic community. Hopefully there's one in your area.
Yeah, Samantha, I just dropped our email address. It's info@dignityusa.org. If you want to shoot me an email, we can see if we can get you connected with the community. So the next question is also from Alan. It was, do you think this will help get at the problem of clericalism? I'm not 100% sure what that was in reference to, but I guess we can discuss that topic because I'm sure it has lots of answers. So.
Gosh, I'm happy to start on that one. Part of what happened around the issuance of the final report from the Synod is questions started coming up as to whether the lay people and the non-bishops would actually be able to vote next year at the session. There is a movement among some Synod delegates to say it's not really a Synod of bishops if these other delegates get to vote. So there are clear tensions emerging around this issues. I think this process of trying to, everybody made a big deal about what it was like to sit at these round tables all on the same level and, talk with each other and mix things up. And that was such a revelation for so many of these folks who live very sheltered, very privileged, very isolated in many cases lives, that I think we can hope that experience might show them that there are great things happening outside of the clerical sphere and invite them to get more involved in that. But as a whole, this remains, I think, a very clerically oriented process. And any transformation in our church about how decisions are made, how power is shared, it has a long way to go. Again, my personal opinion on that. Sam, anything to share on that one?
No, I would concur exactly with what you said, Marianne. I think we have a very long way to go in terms of rooting out clericalism. These Synod delegates, this is less than 400 people out of a church of 1 billion. And I think even within the Synod, the vast majority of those who were participating were bishops. Now, the Synod of Bishops, I don't know if it's a statute or if it's a canon, the Synod of Bishops is really an advisory body. It doesn't have any official final authority that rests with the Pope. And so I would hope and be hopeful that the lay delegates will continue to be able to vote in the future. I think those who are raising this idea that only bishops should be able to vote in the synod. I don't think they have any canonical ground to say that. I don't think they have any theological ground necessarily to say that. I think that's their opinion and that's what they want. And that seems to not be what the Pope wants. So I'm hopeful that perhaps next year we'll have a similar experience.
Hey, folks, we're about 5 minutes to go. Any last questions from anybody? Well, I just want to say that this is a big new part of our dignity.
We do have one question, Daniel, and I think
Okay.
Sam will really like this one. Where can I get a copy of Sam's book? Which is great, by the way. Phenomenal book.
You can borrow it from the Vatican now. The Pope
And
has it.
59 libraries now. Thank you, Darby. And thank you, Lori, for your question. It's available really anywhere you can buy books. I would encourage you to go to the Paulus Press website, which I believe is pauluspress.com. And if you search for my name there, you'll see it come up and you can order it directly from the publisher. The book is called God's Works Revealed: Spirituality, Theology, and Social Justice for Gay, Lesbian, and Bisexual Catholics.
And how will the recording be available to people, Marianne? Is it going to be on the website, or do people have to ask for it specifically?
We generally post to our YouTube channel, but we can, Darby, tell me if I'm overstepping. We'll put a link, we'll send out a mailing once the link is available, so folks can access it, and we'll likely have a link to it from our website for a while as well. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yes, on the website, we can send out an email. What I would highly recommend everybody do is go to dignityusa.org and subscribe to our mailing list. You will be getting the date lines that we send out every other week, which is like a big newsletter. And we will, of course, be including the link to it in our next one that's coming out. It's not going to be this Friday, but it will be not this Friday, not the next Friday, but the Friday after that. So if all else fails, it will definitely be in Dateline. So.
Well, thank you everybody for this. This is really a historic moment for Dignity USA, and Sam and Marianne made it happen. So I hope we can remember this for years to come, and really the start of a whole new way of influencing not only our own communities here in the States, but LGBTQIA Catholics around the world. This is wonderful.
Well,
I had a couple closing words. Sorry, Daniel.
Okay.
Before going to Rome, I had shared with a couple of people that really in this work, I get to do two different things. Sometimes I get to go somewhere and promote my book and share my ideas as Sam Albano. And other times I have to be a representative of the voices of other people. And this synodal process really is an example of the latter. After all of our listening sessions and hearing all of your voices across the country, those are voices that I really felt a responsibility to carry with me to Rome and to share with other people in the conversations we had there. And so I thank you for trusting Marianne and me to share your voices. Thank you for your support in the work that we did, because it's really on behalf of everyone in our organization. And I certainly hope and pray that we represented all of you well.
amen. Thank you,
Amen.
Sam. It's beautiful.
Thank you.